Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today with Family Office Insights. We have our interview series with notable members of the family office community. In this case, we have Ari Moses with the Fisher Brothers out of New York City. And I can say that Ari and I know, I don't know, it's been 10 years, Ari, something like
At
that.
least, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
at
it goes
least 10
back. I
years.
wish I remembered where we met, but I'm pretty good at taking notes and keep tracking those things. I'll have to look it up
Yeah,
afterwards.
I don't remember either, but it's been quite a long time. And so we've enjoyed sharing ideas together and just knowing each other personally, which has been fun. So
Absolutely.
today we're going to talk a little bit about uh, what is arguably a single family office, and Ari's embedded in that single family office and has several unique roles there. And so the idea is just to talk about what's going on there, how that operation works, and then hopefully we'll get some insights from for the others to not just insights but interesting information. It's obviously a notable family. They've had a long history of real estate success in the city, and we're going to be finding out in other places as well. So, Ari, thanks for doing this today. Really, really glad to see you again. And
My pleasure. And I'm excited to chat.
Sweet. So let's just talk about you so we have context to give us a little background about you.
Sure. So I have let's see, I grew up in Miami, came up to New York for college, made the mistake of finding a local girl, got married. In exactly 4 weeks from yesterday will be 25 years. Um, so, my family life has been really a gift and a blessing. Um, and I've got my youngest graduating from high school in a few weeks, my oldest graduating with her MBA in a few weeks. Um, and really exciting stuff, and just really puts life in context. Um, and that was kind of the really what defines Ari Moses. Professionally speaking, I came up here for school. I studied engineering in college, and as I've been telling my kids now who are doing their job searches and planning their careers, I spent the first part of my career figuring out everything I didn't want to do.
Yeah, nice.
While I was an intern in college, I worked as an engineer for 5 summers. Um, and by the time I was graduating, I decided I didn't want to be an engineer. My degree was in computer engineering, which my kids laugh at today because I don't know the first thing about programming or really computers anymore. Things have changed a little bit in the
You're
last
not
30 years.
coding Chat GDP in the back room,
I can't even figure out how to download the app. But
right?
uh, but I came out and I joined Deloitte Touche a in their audit practice, but it was really interesting and really eye-opening as kind of a first job. It was a consulting role, but it was a group that was a subsidiary of their financial audits that was focused on computer audits at the time with a thesis of garbage in, garbage out. So we needed to be able to advise on auditing the computer systems to make sure that the data going into the financial audit was accurate. My group was a subset of that, which was focused on computer security, computer network security. And mind you, this is in the mid 90s when nobody cared about any of that. Um, two really interesting career lessons there. One was I did a project for, I think it was my second client. This was 6 months out of school. I spent 6 months living in Boston working with this client. And the project was on implementing a antivirus solution. Now, this was the mid 90s when, I mean, this was literally, we were taking McAfee out of the box and implementing for a client and
Yeah,
writing a report kind of detailing the process and the use case instructions, et cetera. Um, After that project was done, two things happened that were notable. One, I became Deloitte's global antivirus expert. So I was 6 months out of school and I was their global antivirus expert because I was the only one in the company that had ever done a project on
yeah. So you
antivirus.
had the chops nobody else had, right?
Yeah, it was. I got published in some trade magazines at the time. I had no idea what was going on. The second lesson, which was probably even more important, that I've carried with me to the day, was as a consultant, I wrote this. I did the work, helped them implement, wrote a report. I walked into the client the last day, and I handed him a copy of the report. He was sitting behind his desk. Handed him a copy of the report. He takes it. He says, "Thank you." Opens his bottom drawer, puts the report in, closes it. I said, well, didn't you want to sit and go work through it and, and discuss it? And, I'm happy to set a meeting. He goes, no, I'm good. I'm like, what do you mean you're good? You just hired me for 6 months to write this report. You don't even you want the feedback. He says, no, you don't understand. He said, I'm doing everything that you said because you're Deloitte, and there's nobody who's ever going to get fired for doing what Deloitte told them to.
It's like no one gets fired for using IBM sort of thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And
It was
ironically,
optics. He had to have the report done so he could look at everybody else and say, we had the experts tell us.
that's exactly what it was. And
Ari
that
Moses, just out of school. Right.
yep. So that was it was interesting. Ironically, that was the only job I've had working for a large organization. Um, and anyway, so fast forward from there, I left 3 years later to go back to business school. This was in 1999, went to business school with a not sure what I wanted to study, but the only thing I ruled out was finance. This was in 1999, and as I pursued the year, I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue business development at a .com. That's the thing to do right now.
In that
And
era. Yeah.
I chased a .com. It was called Flues.com. Their claim to fame was Whoopi Goldberg was their spokesperson. It was a online gift currency. I mean, I don't even remember exactly what that meant, but maybe, a early version of PayPal or something similar. I spent the summer there. It was great. And the last day of the summer, I had an exit interview, and I had the eye-opening realization that if I went back to work for this company after I graduated, I'd be making less money than I was making going in.
Wow.
My wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and I said, nope, that's not going to work. I went back to school, and I pivoted, and I ended up majoring in finance.
Yeah,
so sometimes the best laid plans, don't really work out that way.
So what we talked about a little earlier, and it's interesting in the context of what you just said, is you've spent a lot of time figuring out what you don't want to do, right? So it's kind of ironic that one of the things you were sure you didn't want to do, you ended up doing, right?
It is. Although from there, I went right into equity research, which I did for 6 to 7 years. And very quickly in that 6 to 7 years, I decided I didn't want to do it, but I stuck it out. It was a great learning environment. And then I got a call one day about a job that turned out to be the job that I'm now, sitting in the seat for 17 years.
It's been 17, hasn't it? That's amazing.
In 17, I started back to the family. I started this role on my oldest daughter's 6th birthday. So this is the one who's graduating with her MBA today. So nice. It really, truly feels like it's been a lifetime.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, for the people that don't know, about the legacy family, the Fisher Brothers, just a little frame out.
So Fisher Brothers is so I got to look at the clock for this one, a now 109-year-old business. It was started by 3 Fisher Brothers in 1915. They were bricklayers in Queens. They started laying bricks for themselves, as the stories are told. Moved into Manhattan in the 30s, started doing a lot of residential, and then ultimately office development. I think the number I'd heard that over the years they had developed around 15 million square feet of office. In Manhattan, they currently own 5.5 million of that. Had sold out of the rest over the years. They had owned a lot of residential, which they'd also sold out of. But the office that we still own, or everything we own office-wise in the city, is we developed, we own, operate, manage, secure, clean. We are fully vertically integrated around that. We also own some office in about 1.5 million square feet in DC. So that's kind of the office portfolio, which is our core. Happy to talk a little bit about that because I know that question always comes up in terms of this environment and owning office buildings.
Yeah.
We've also, with some generational transition over the last really 17 years, 20 years, we have gotten now back into residential development. And we've also gotten into kind of 2 other vertical businesses, one of which is a real estate lending business and asset management platform. And the other, which I'll have to describe some more, is really focused on the entertainment and specifically location-based entertainment industry, which is at the intersection of real estate and experiences and entertainment. and I can talk some more about that.
Well, I just go back a step. When the brothers were in Queens, where did they come? They all come from the same country?
Well, the truth is, I'm not sure if they were born here. I don't think they were. Their father certainly was not. He was from Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, there's not a great history recorded of the family in terms of, capturing all of this information. So I've never gotten a great answer other than I know it is Eastern Europe. I don't know which town, what country, what town.
Yeah,
I don't know
good.
who brought them over,
Yeah.
and how, but they, as I said, I don't believe they were born here. They might have been.
Yeah.
And one of the brothers started this, as I guess would be usual, started this and then recruited his other brothers to join him.
Yeah.
And then, to some degree, they say the rest is history. I think it's been a long, storied, but in a real positive way. They really emerged into one of the kind of the storied New York real estate families.
No doubt. Yeah.
With iconic assets, and have been part of that landscape for many, many, many years. Currently, the business is with some unfortunate deaths in the family over the last year and a half or
I'm
so.
aware of that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's really now fully managed by third generation.
Yeah.
There is some fourth generation in the company, and there's certainly members of the fifth generation that have been born already.
Yeah, there was an unfortunate plane crash there, so we don't have to talk about it, but I think that's what a lot of people might have known.
Yeah, that was in 2003. I was one of the second or three partners in the second generation. That was one of them. So I work now for Winston Fisher and Kenny Fisher. Winston's father Richard and uncle Tony, along with Kenny's father Arnold, were the second generation. Tony is the one who had passed in that plane crash.
Yeah.
It was a small plane heading up from New York up to, I think, Martha's Vineyard. Very tragic for the family, of course. And then 2 years after that, 2.5 years after that, his brother Richard, Winston's father, passed away. He was in his early 60s. He passed away from cancer. And so that was the beginning of the transition to the third generation, with Winston really, at that point stepping into kind of leadership on that part of the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the same time, actually earlier than that, Arnold, who was that third partner of the second generation, two of his sons, Kenny and Stephen, had joined the business. I joined the partnership ahead of Winston. And so when Winston stepped into the role, there were really those four partners: Winston, Arnold, and his two sons, Kenny and Stephen.
And so as long as you've been there, Winston has been at the helm, right?
No, the four of them really managed together.
Yeah.
They had different areas of focus. It was a little divide and conquer. Arnold, from the time I joined, Arnold was probably in his 70s at the time. He was really very philanthropic and high-level strategy focused. Stephen was running a construction company that we owned at the time. We've since sold out of. Kenny was really focused on our core assets: leasing, operations, engineering, everything tied to kind of managing, operating the core assets. And Winston was really focused on new projects, new real estate projects, as well as investment. And so that's, kind of on a day-to-day, I dealt a lot more with Winston on kind of the new investment side of things. All the partners were involved in all aspects, so they managed as a
team,
executive committee and as a team.
Committee,
but they each had the area that they spent more of their time focused on.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to note that it's a great American story, right? Even though one of the founders died early at 65, he created an impressive amount of real estate holdings in one of the most challenging places in the world to do it. Like, it's impressive, right?
It really is amazing. And as you said, just a great story. In fact, the one thing I'll correct that you said when you started was that I was embedded within a family office. The right terminology, I would say, is I run the family office, but we're embedded in the operating business.
I got it wrong. Yeah.
And what's interesting from family office terminology is So I remember about a year, I joined in 2007, which was an interesting timing, just given it was right ahead of the '08 financial crisis.
Yeah.
So I joined in early '07, so it was called a year and a half before the crisis was in full-blown mode. Um, I remember in that first year, I was invited to a lunch um, by a private banker, and co-hosting the lunch was was someone involved in kind of family office circles, family office networking. I got introduced, and they said to me, "Hey, do you work for a family office?" And I said, "No." They said, "Well, what do you do?" And I described it, and they stopped me about a minute in, and they said, "You know what? Hate to break it to you, but you work for a family office."
Yeah, right.
Back in 2007, that wasn't a widely known term. It wasn't a
Absolutely
widely
true.
used term.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, I remember coming back. My boss actually got very upset initially when I used that term because the term back then, he thought it implied that he was a non-sophisticated investor, that he was a passive, non-operating. He goes, "We're real estate experts. We're
That's
not
super
passive. We're not
interesting, right?
unsophisticated." And so he didn't
Yeah.
actually like the term. He's
Yeah.
now 17 years later, he's fully embraced it.
Yeah.
But that's the change in the industry from back then over the last certainly 17 years. I'd argue even the last 10 years, maybe even the last 5, the term has really changed in terms of how it's used, who adopts it, who accepts it, who identifies, and what people associate and affiliate with a family office,
Do
what it
you
means.
think, Ari, it was because a family office was viewed at the time in the context of the Rockefeller Group, and that I was just a beneficiary and not a sophisticated investor, and so that would suggest such? Or is it that, I'm second generation, didn't have anything to do with making the money, and so we handed it off to one of the big banks that call themselves family offices for running money, although that wasn't so prevalent at the time. Yeah, I wonder, that's an interesting viewpoint, right?
Yeah, I don't know what it was about it, and I think I mean part is probably right. First of all, I don't think there were that many offices established as pure investment focus, which we were not, right? As I said, I was embedded in the business, helping the business. A term that we never really used, we never really embraced was diversification, right? That was never the goal of it for the family. In fact, I had a realization recently, when everyone talks about, well, every family office is different. The reality is there is one thing that I would argue that every family office, that every family has in common, and that's the wealth was created in a very concentrated manner,
No
right? The
doubt.
wealth at some point was created by a operating entity, an operating enterprise, an operating business, whatever that took. Even by the way, whether if that's private equity and hedge funds, those are still businesses,
Yep.
right? So it was that concentration changes the view of a wealthy individual who ultimately has the wealth to form a family office as to what diversification really means.
Yeah.
Right? Some of them are not seeking it at all because they never wanted it and it didn't need it in their real successes. And others don't understand it in the nature of an investing diversification and
Yeah.
are looking for help doing that. I think that may have been what's transitioned is
It,
more families are having the capital events and the capital liquidity and becoming passive pools of capital, liquid pools of capital that are now looking how to diversify and how to learn how to diversify.
that, and I think that one of the things that is consistent with that viewpoint is that the second and third generation didn't necessarily participate in the operating company that made the wealth. And so they're just trying to keep the stay rich money. And that's where the diversification conversation comes in, because they're not thinking about, okay, I created an operating company and made all this money and sold it. They're saying, wait a minute, this is this big pool of money, and I don't own the skill set because 2 generations ago owned the skill set that generated all this money, right? The operating business.
That's right. And I will highlight, and again, just from my experience, working for the principals that I work with, is, it depends what you're seeking, partially depends on whether you have an operating business environment or not, right? If there's just a pool of capital, um, versus the framework of an operating business. You're going to think about that diversification differently. We'll think about diversification here within our business, but it's diversification of real estate geographies and real estate asset classes.
What you guys
And
know. Yeah, the business that you know, right? Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
so it's not diversification of how do we get money out of real estate and invest in biotech.
Right.
Um,
For the sake of diversification. Yeah, it doesn't make, yeah,
for the
totally.
sake of diversity. That doesn't mean that we won't look at diversification at times, but that's not a driving force. In fact, I would argue for a lot of families, there are tons of different models of family offices. I have lots of peers and I talk to them, and there are some that will be managed like an endowment. I think it's the exception, not the rule. Unless you're the term I've heard is the individuals, right? Yes, certainly, certain groups will be managed like an endowment, but it's not maybe the norm. What families tend to adopt certain theses, points of view, biases, objectives, goals, life goals, missions, whatever you want to call it, and that influences their day-to-day objectives, right? The how they're going to spend their money. In fact, I think there's a big gap between people who work in family offices and people who are trying to serve them, in that the people who are trying to serve family offices don't realize an important point about the offices is they look at a lot of what is done and they might put a label on it of its irrational behavior.
Irrational, not
Irrational. No,
irrational.
irrational.
Yeah.
It's, and they struggle, to help understand what it is that family's doing, and then to try to advise how to fix the problem. And I think that what's missing is that for these families, it's not a problem and
Right.
it's not irrational. It seems to be irrational to a institutional, traditional investment advisor who says, well, you got to be fully diversified in order to protect, allocated to protect your risk.
Yeah.
But when you're coming at it from the point of view of it's one family's capital, so they can do with it what they want, what's important to them, and they understand the concept of concentrated risk, which I just mentioned, and they have their missions that either are important, that's important to them or their kids or their families or their worldviews.
Yeah.
You peel it back that way, you realize it's not actually irrational. It just seems that way to the traditional, even to
Money
a
manager,
fund investment
somebody
team.
running money at a bank or a wealth
Yeah.
management firm. They're
And that I think is the gap. That I think is what defines, you take this term, everyone can call themselves a family office. What defines a family office is where the decision making is such that it doesn't have to be what everybody externally would agree is a purely rational investment decision.
yeah, super helpful insight. I would say it's analogous in some way that Warren Buffett actually doesn't feel like he needs to be diversified. He's heavily
Exactly.
concentrated, right?
He knows what he's doing. He knows the risks he
Yeah.
wants and is able to take and understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, he's been not necessarily an advocate of diversification, right? I mean, highly concentrated Apple stock, Coca-Cola gets to go down the list, right? Not to
Yeah.
mention the balance sheet and the operating company, the insurance and so forth. Yeah. Super interesting. Well, I think that's a good segue to talk about what we talked about a little bit earlier before the call about how your role in all this fits and what you do day to day. And yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, like any good family office, I wear many hats. Um, and some of those hats are defined and some of those hats are not defined. And some of those hats are, I just see lying around, the hallways and grab them and put them on.
Yeah.
Because, and even complicating that is the fact that there's an operating business around it, right? So it's not just many hats within an investment operation or a family office that that is kind of broader than just investment. Right here, there's an operating component, and while the range of activity of portfolio responsibility over the years ranges from cash management to securities to fund investing to direct venture and to operating businesses. Fortunately for my mental health, not all of those at the same time.
Yeah.
And then layered on top of those, there's estate planning, trust planning, governance, and the other components that wrap around all of that. But
hold on one second. Do you look at it, or does the principals look at it with you in terms of we have operating business, but we also have beneficiaries that we need to, like when somebody's in a multifamily office, they look at managing the beneficiaries. Do they look at it that way as well?
so that has been my part of my role is helping manage those beneficiaries where the business there's two layers of beneficiary, right? There's the beneficiaries who are involved in the business or whose parents are involved in the business. And so there's a direct linkage. And there's the beneficiaries who are not involved on a day-to-day basis and whose parents aren't in the business. And so how to manage those constituents, how to help them understand what it is that they have exposures to, what their rights and responsibilities are,
Right.
what their interests and non-interests are. So that's an important component of it. And I think everybody who works at family office would agree and acknowledge, right, the complexity that that gets introduced after you move past Gen 1 is exponential each generation.
Totally.
For lots and lots of different reasons, but
expectations, emotions, family, all the stuff that happens that everybody knows in their families, right? And then throw an operating company and a bunch of money into it, gets even more complicated, right?
It's complicated, and the reality is, I think that's why there's an industry now around it.
Yeah,
because that complication.
Very good
right?
point.
And so and I am part of this industry. I love this industry. I think this is first of all, I find stories of families and how they've evolved are fascinating. Helping these families navigate, great wealth is a responsibility as much as it is a privilege.
Yeah.
And navigating that, and philanthropy is certainly absolutely part of that. There's a lot of components that go back. I will say, the family here is not just philanthropically focused, but active philanthropy. So, one of the claims to fame for the family was one of the partners who unfortunately, didn't have kids or chose not to have kids. I actually don't know. One of the brothers, he actually, his real legacy was that he bought the Intrepid aircraft carrier out of dry dock, brought it to New York, and created the Intrepid Museum and Museum Foundation out of that.
Yeah.
And tied into that became a whole series of active philanthropies tied to the U.S. military, tied to veterans, active military, helping address issues such as traumatic brain injury, issues such as prosthetic limbs and devices, both research and cures and treatments. Serving, there's one of the charities is the Fisher House Foundation, which serves military hospitals where it provides lodging, food, housing for families of soldiers to stay while their loved ones are being treated in the military hospitals.
Yeah.
And there's 100 of these around the world now. The family is actively involved. They're involved in governing, but their governing is really around policy. They get involved in their community, in serving and giving back. I mean, largely around New York, but I'd argue, even their roles are, global. And that's both a privilege and a responsibility that they've taken because they see how the American dream has really fed their successes.
No doubt. And so it's really interesting, Ari. I am in this family office world on some level, and I knew you owned the Intrepid, but I didn't know about the facilities. Is it something that there's an intentional limited awareness because they're not looking for pats on the back? Or would it be interesting if more people knew about it?
It's a great question. And the answer is, it's certainly part of the former, right? It's not a family that is doing this for accolades and recognition. They were doing it in most cases here. They were doing it for the soldiers, right? It wasn't even for the government. It was for the soldiers.
Yeah.
It was for the veterans. It was truly about the people and the individuals. That said, the only pats on the back I think that they would want for it is to the degree that it helps make those organizations more successful, right? Getting bodies to the Intrepid Museum. They're constantly out fundraising for their foundation, for these organizations, as any, as you would with any charity.
Yeah.
So that is super important, to them. It's the Fisher House Foundation is one that sorry, not the Fisher House Foundation. Fisher Houses is one that, that is the one that I mentioned, the military, the housing of the military hospitals. The others, these are physical facilities that, and they go by a bunch of different names. I'm happy to share information after this, on those. But it's really about the soldiers. And
Yeah.
I'll echo that, that when I got called about this job in 2007, first phone call I made was to my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, I just got a job offer from this company." He goes, "Well, what do you know about the family?" I said, "Honestly, not much. I didn't. I was not familiar with them ahead of that." And he hangs up the phone and he calls me back an hour later. He goes, "Is this the family behind all the military organizations?" I said, "I don't know." And I went to find out. And that actually helped me make my decision, right? Because that was important. That was just a feel-good moment.
It was a good signal, right?
It was a good signal.
Yeah.
I'll take that segue, into that was a good signal of the type of people they are, but also the way they think. They think organizationally, and that's led to kind of where we are today in that, we stood up 2 new operating businesses over the last
in the middle of COVID. Right.
And in the middle of COVID. And one of them in the middle of COVID was a place of gathering. It was literally it's called AREA15. It's based in Las Vegas. We own land there. And it was a solution to what do we do with parcels of land in that market. In fairness, we came up with the idea prior to COVID. So this was born in 2017, where we said that, how do we create a concept that's going to draw people off the strip? We're about a 5-minute ride from the Wynn Hotel. How do we create this concept? And we spent years brainstorming it. In fact, this was being master planned, this land, before the '08 crisis. So when I got to Fisher Brothers, my first roommate was the architectural model for what we were going to master plan.
They put you in the room with the architectural model. That's not so bad.
I was there with the model, and fast forward a year and a half, we were pencils down. We were fortunate we never put shovels in the ground. But we spent 10 years kind of brainstorming, what do we do with this land? It was about 100 acres of land, 90 acres of land along the highway. And we realized we're not going to master plan it. And so this concept of AREA15 was born, which is the concept of creating a physical home, a location for basing the entertainment. So the term is, the term of art is generally location-based entertainment, but it's creating this physical place for collection of tenants, right? That's the business we're in, is real estate, but around the experience economy, immersions, experiences, music, light, sound, festival, bringing all of this together in a way, leveraging the concept of proximity from a mall, but recognizing that the concept of malls for shopping, for retail, was not the future, but place for people to go and gather still was the future. And we created this box. It's literally a bunker. If you see pictures of it, it's a bunker. It sits off the highway in Las Vegas, which brought together this industry. We were fortunate that early in the process, we came across a fantastic company called Meow, which is an immersive art company that we became the anchor for their first expansion. They were born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they partnered with us as our anchor. And now we've built and designed around them. In fact, we're now expanding from this project. We started with 15 acres of the 90. We went to 20. We're now expanding another 10 to 15 acres that are being anchored by Universal Parks. Because Universal, they're building a horror experience there. Universal saw what we were doing. and said, hey, we want to be part of this. And so we're building
Very cool.
for them and around them. And now we've really activated this. We had 3 million plus visitors come to visit Area 15 without Universal being there in each of the last 2 years, so 22 and 23.
Isn't it interesting coming out of you can't gather anywhere? And I know you guys didn't know that this was going to happen, but the appetite after COVID just went through the roof for gatherings, travel, experiential stuff, right?
Yeah, we opened the doors in September of 20. So right in the middle of COVID. I remember somebody saying to us at the time, hey, kudos on having such conviction in what you're doing that you open in the middle of COVID. And our response was, well, we had two choices. We were either going to open with conviction or we were going to open without conviction.
Right, right.
But we were opening.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And the reality is, looking back, that actually may have been one of the keys to success, in that we opened sort of by plan, but not really by plan, very deliberately. Over the first 6 months, we opened without any of our tenants being active. We just opened the doors, but the reality, locals in Vegas who were there were looking for any place they could go to get out.
Yeah.
And we were one of the few places. We opened 1 or 2 tenants a month for the 6 months, and culminated, that was in September, culminated in February of 21, 6 months later, with the grand opening of Meow, which was the anchor. It wasn't designed that way. That's just how it played, and it was perfect. And we had the time to learn slowly and deliberately how to go about opening this thing up and build on it and learn as we were going. Where today, as I said, that was 21.
How many tenants? How
I don't
about?
know how to count. It's probably, and it's changed a little bit because we own a lot of things ourselves. So there's
Yeah.
probably 10 tenants under the roof.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 15. I'm not sure exactly how we count it or define it. And then we're in the process of leasing up the space for this new district,
Yeah.
which is being called Area 15 district. So
Nice.
the current Area 15 was a box. Now it's becoming a broader district, and it's going to be, I mean, the same amazing concepts. You know, we partnered early on with Chris Wink, who was the founder of Blue Man Group, one of the founders of Blue Man Group, who we brought on. He created an experience that is a tenant of ours that's called Wink World, but he also was a consultant to us and spent, I think, the first 30 days on the job just designing our lighting scheme. Because the lighting to create, the aura, the environment, the aesthetic in the space was super important to us. We set out to create a brand, which I would argue now, several years later, we've been successful in doing. Because to be a brand is, go to the mall, you go to Nordstrom, you don't go to the X, Y, and Z mall. Here, you go to Area 15, and then you do all this stuff. And that doesn't detract. We did it in such a way it doesn't detract from our tenants.
So do you think that having the Sphere there helped you?
Yes, yeah, I actually do. I mean, certainly there's, having more stuff to do in Vegas on the Strip. Any draw that keeps people on the Strip is something we have to kind of push even harder to overcome. But we're really good at doing that,
Yeah.
at being creative in that way. But the Sphere helps bring people to Vegas who are seeking something different. I mean, don't get me wrong. People are already going to Vegas seeking something different.
Yes.
The Sphere is just an
Sure.
even greater expression. But I would imagine that everybody who flies into Vegas to go see, it was U2, I'm not sure who it is today, at the Sphere, is finding their way over to Area 15 at some point as well.
That's super cool.
They're seekers.
Yeah.
Right. We got asked early on who our demographic was, and it was really our response was, it wasn't demographic, it was psychographic of what we appeal to. And that same psychographic, it's the people who are seeking something new and different. That's what gets you to go to the Sphere.
Yeah, it's the experience seekers. I mean, it's such a trend, especially among the people who are, in the sharing economy anyway, right? They're at the point in their life they got some income or assets that they can, that rather than buying a new car, they're going to come to Vegas, right? And or have experiences, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's um my boss Winston's, kind of started using a new term today, and the terms have evolved over the years. There's always been a way to describe this. For example, early on, we described what we were building as, I think he described this the fighting pits of Rome versus others were trying to build the Colosseum. And I would argue in that context, the Sphere is the Colosseum. But we were looking at this and saying the fighting pit was what's important. This industry is growing. There's so many new ideas that are looking for a home. And what Area 15 did was create context.
Yeah.
Like, that was his new term of art, right? It's
Yeah.
the context for everybody who's there. It's a context for the tenants who are there being among other tenants. And it's also the context for the visitors who are there saying, we know we want to experience, we just don't know what. So we're going to come here and explore. And by the way, we're going to come back multiple days, and we're going to come back each time we visit.
Is that what your experience has been? People come there for multiple days?
Yeah, in fact, we started selling, we had bundles. That was one of the new introductions of, app wasn't there from day one, but we've introduced as bundles of tickets to bundle our tenants and our experiences in different ways.
Yeah.
And some of the new bundles that have rolled out now are actually multi-day passes.
Yeah.
Where you can use these multiple days because there's too much to do in one day.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's part of the whole experience economy. Solving one of the biggest problems of that industry is repeat visit. That's what Area 15 was designed to do. It creates context. It creates reason for coming and visit and for spending time there, right? People don't want to go to an escape room and spend an hour. They want to go someplace and spend 4 or 5 hours.
That's right.
With the family. That creates value. It's exponential value, not linear, because when you can kill a whole afternoon, and in Vegas, when you can kill an afternoon that keeps you out of the casinos, that's worth a lot.
Kind of like the Dave and Buster's idea, right? Multiple stuff.
We don't love that analogy.
Yeah. I
Dave &
get why
Buster's,
you wouldn't like that. Yeah.
but they've been really successful, so we don't want to detract from that either. But Dave & Buster's was an early example of people just wanting to go and do a bunch of things under one roof.
Yeah.
And that absolutely, is analogous.
Yeah.
But back to the family, right? How did the family think about this? We get asked a lot and back to my role in kind of the family office, right? We get asked a lot about, well, how does this fit with a landlord that owns Class A commercial office in Manhattan?
Yeah.
And the answer is because the theme that permeates both of them, two different extremes, and I would call it with residential development in the middle, is there's a changing relationship between people and their places. The relationship between people and their office buildings, the relationship between people in their apartments and the apartment building, and the relationship between people and the leisure spaces they go to are changing. One of the taglines for Area 15 was about moving from spectator to participant, right?
Right. Very clever.
Hey, that happens to a degree, and that's how we think about our office spaces. We built another small business targeted around amenitizing office buildings. We've currently done it for ourselves, creating amenity spaces. In one of our buildings, it was in our basement, and this amenity space, it's lounge spaces, grab-and-go food spaces, gym spaces, and others for the tenants, as well as conference, event, and gathering spaces that are for use by tenants and people from the outside. In another building, we actually did it in leasable space, where we saw value by creating this asset for the rest of the tenants in the building. In our residential properties, we've created what we go by as the house brand. In New York, it's called House 39. In DC, it's called Station House. In Miami, it's called Win House. And the brand is an amenitized brand. It's about creating big amenity spaces, not a small room that has a treadmill in it, but a real gym space.
Someplace you want to go, right?
Yeah, where saunas, steam rooms, classes, and the like that take for the residents and expand it so that their living spaces is not just confined to the 4 walls of their apartment, but it's the building that they live in. And Area 15 is just the extreme expression on a pure creative entertainment side. That's how the family thinks. It's about how do we take these themes and wrap them around what we do, and it goes to our investing as well, right? A lot of what I'm focused on is how do we express on the investing side some of the themes we learn, whether it's within location-based entertainment, whether it's in entertainment in general, whether it's in real estate innovation and prop tech, or anything related. And we define related as anything comes through our business. I mean, over the years, we've invested in financial services, energy storage, even, technology, Web 3.0 and metaverse technologies and crypto, because all of these things have tied into what we're doing operationally. And that's what I help do is help think about those things and execute. I mean, I was leading some innovation efforts here for a while around how do we, the business is very focused on solving yesterday and today's problems, but we as an organization are thinking about what are tomorrow's problems.
Yeah.
How do we think about them for our business? How do we think about them as investors? How do we think about them for the family? And for the greater Fisher family, which is its employees, right?
Yeah.
Like any good family, business and office, they think of the employees
People.
as part of that fabric.
The assets go up and down the elevator every day, sort of thinking. Yeah.
Correct.
Can you make a comment about being that many people are feeling troubled about commercial office space? And, we've talked to many people about this. And if you have Class A buildings in New York City, you sort of don't have to worry about anything. But, that's just not my opinion. That's just what we hear, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you feel about what's going on with your Class A space and in the context of the fear about the demise of the office, right?
For sure. With the caveat, a couple caveats. One is, it's kind of funny within the walls of the firm. I'm the non-real estate guy. As soon as I step in the elevator and go downstairs, I become the real estate expert.
Right.
And so, I as a student, standing at the water cooler, I'm learning by osmosis here. But I will. So that's kind of one caveat in terms of the messenger here. But two is we are in New York. Our core office is New York and DC, really New York focused. Manhattan is a different beast, arguably, than a lot of other markets. Even than a lot of other kind of urban core markets.
No doubt.
And so whether this applies elsewhere, I don't know. A lot of what I learned there is from, I haven't gotten to yet, but I'll get to a little bit about our other operating business, which is our real estate asset management, which is really credit focused lending platform. That actually has brought us into markets across the country now. And to get to know those markets, kind of very deeply. But from a New York focus, we are fortunate that we are all Class A. We have 5.5 million square feet that's concentrated in 5 properties, really 4 major properties and 1 smaller property. And we have been the beneficiaries of what I've heard termed as a flight to quality, where tenants who previously couldn't afford Class A space because on an absolute dollar basis, they needed 4 floors. Well, now maybe they only need 2 floors because they're taking less space as they massage their work, their
work at home team
work policies. So that has definitely benefited Class A. I can't talk about the impact on Class B and C. I hear the same things that you do. And I imagine that industry, those segments are going to be largely based on credit, how they financed their properties, location, and within the city, and timing, right? How long can they last? Because some of this is going to come back, but I can't speak really, in depth to that. From the Class A office, I could tell you, we had a couple of major tenants that were leaving our properties, and that was announced way before COVID. And we've backfilled most of that space already. I think we had the claim to fame that we signed in one of our properties the largest commercial office lease in the U.S. since the start of COVID. And that was Christmas week last year. That was
you don't have to.
It was a law firm. And it was about 765,000 square feet. I believe it was 17 floors in a property. That was a lot of hard work by the team. But we've been successful in backfilling our spaces. I can't talk to I think with the rest of it, we're going to fill in with kind of collection of smaller tenants. I'm not sure. Right. I don't know this, kind of the strategy, but our offices in, 6th Avenue, Park Avenue, 3rd Avenue, we've been fortunate to be in prime locations. Even the office on 3rd Avenue is 2 blocks from Grand Central, right? So that creates a lot of value there. And so it's been a a good experience in a difficult environment. The financing environment for sure has been difficult, although from what I'm hearing, well, actually what I'm hearing outside these walls is that seems to be improving.
I
You
hear
know,
the same.
a lot of the fear, there's a lot, you know, I hear a lot about a lot of the fear and expectations of distress. And it's not clear that those are going to materialize.
Yeah.
There's always a mix. There's always there's lots of credit coming due in this year and next. You know, the lending markets for that are slowly opening from what I'm hearing. Whether the people are going to be able to refinance or not is to be seen. So, but I don't think we're going to get the level of distress that many are fearing, or flip side of that, that many family offices seem to be hoping for, right? There's a lot, or funds that are raising capital seem to be hoping for that there's going to be this distress, and we're going to have a chance to go in and buy all of Manhattan at severely discounted prices.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like that is what's inevitable. Could
And
it
that
happen?
cycle has happened, a few times in our lifetime, right? So,
Well, that was absolutely the cycle during early COVID. There were distress funds that raised right then saying all these assets are dead, and there was no transactions.
right.
So it wasn't that there wasn't stress felt by the owners. It was that there wasn't distress that was realized by having to exit. Now, part of that was everybody was feeling at the same time, and so the banks were very much kicking cans down the road and weren't.
What's the term? It's like lend and extend, right? Sort of thing, right?
You know,
Yeah.
or sometimes it's extend and pretend.
Right. That.
So so we've been fortunate on that side. You know, our property in DC, our tenant there is actually the government, so we were fortunate on that side. You know, but as we're lending into projects, this is kind of the business I mentioned where we are a lender. That business, and full disclosure there, that is a business called Lionheart. It's a fully registered vehicle. I
Totally
am
separate business. Yeah.
a whole
Yeah.
separate business. You know, so I can talk about it just as a, we are one of their anchor LPs, and a GP in that business. But they're putting capital to work. I mean, they're lending. There are projects that are happening. They're very conservative in the underwriting, but there is activity. As I said, we're not just lending in New York. It actually started originally. I mean, it's another family office story that started as balance sheet lending by the family.
Yeah.
10 plus years ago. That was actually coming out of the financial crisis, and we started making loans. And then we were approached by a couple other families who said, "Hey, can we do this together?" And we said, "Well, if we want to do that, we have to do it right to make sure that this is a fully separate business."
Yeah.
And so we separated the business, and we ultimately have now registered the business. They're on their third fund, and they are a fully standalone operating organization, but we learn a lot from them. And as they're entering new markets, we're seeing what's happening in these markets. They're not doing a lot of office lending today. So that in itself is telling, and it's no surprise. Even if I knew nothing about the business, I wouldn't expect that there was much office development happening.
Totally.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of multifamily
And hospitality, right? There's some
and hospitality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hospitality has been huge coming out of COVID. Lots of projects that are happening. And there's it's insight, there's a lot of insight there, but they don't, from that
Market
team,
intelligence, right?
it's
Market
market intelligence, but it's also market feel.
Yeah.
I don't sense from them the fear that those markets are going to be distressed anytime soon. And so there's really, but you keep hearing about the $1.5 trillion wall, refinancing wall that's coming. I'm not saying it's not coming. It's important to watch it. It's important to see. And it's important to understand before you jump in, either way. A lot of family offices I talk to these days are, talking about getting involved in real estate, and where they seem to want to start is in distress. To me, that doesn't seem like the best place to dip your toe into a new asset class.
One of the things to consider, right?
Yeah. Again, if you do it right, you do it with the right manager and the right partner. When these partners approach us about partnering on our lending, that was because they said, "Hey, listen, real estate. We don't want a passive fund participation where we don't really understand what's happening. We want somebody who lives and breathes it, and that's what we do. Kind of the same way that we would never, invest on our own in oil and gas, because what do we know about oil and gas? But we would go to that next family who was investing in oil and gas.
Yeah.
In fact, I heard a interesting saying, years ago, was that, from again, another insight from just somebody I met at a conference who said, yeah, as family, we like to invest in other families' core competencies.
Totally makes sense. Like, how logical is that, right? So Ari, most of the audience that will be viewing this are principals and family offices, and then there's several people that will view it that are serving family offices. So can we just talk a little bit about, what you'd like to share to both those constituencies as we wrap it up here? And, you and I can talk forever, and maybe we can do that another time, but
yeah, no, absolutely. So, for my peers, for the principals and the professionals, in the family office, I think that, listen, as I said, I love this industry. I think that is important for us to think of this as an industry, right? Is as the service providers accelerating the effort to try to serve us, is helping. Our role is to help them understand how we can best be served, helping them understand that we're not behaving irrationally, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah, that nuance was, rarely discussed and not really understood by many, I'm sure. Yeah, and thank you for sharing.
I think for us as principals and professionals to think about it that way, we can then help others understand that that's about it. One of the lessons I'm working with my kids right now is around vocabulary, right? Is as they pursue their careers, I said, you can't really get it right if you don't know the vocabulary of what it is that you want to express. What job do you want? Well, what's the right terminology for that industry?
Yeah.
Same thing here is, what is our vocabulary that we're helping each other with when we talk to them, when we talk to the other family about their problems. I get asked a lot why I network, why I would do something like this, why I talk to other families. And the answer is because, first of all, there's a trust component. I want to meet and speak and learn from people who are sitting in the same seat as me, whether they're the steward of the capital or the owner of the capital, i.e. the principal or professional, because they're facing a lot of the same challenges. And let's share with each other, and we can learn from each other. And so, but at the same time, let's try to teach those who are trying to help us by helping them build their vocabulary and understand what they're getting wrong about it. So this message, I guess, is for all three constituents, right? Is if we get a dialogue going, and it's not a dialogue of, hey, I want to buy, I want to sell, but it's, I want to learn and I want to build and I want to partner. That creates, a 1 + 1 = 9 kind of model.
No doubt. And just because somebody has an economic intention and a business that they make a living at, and if it doesn't exactly fit, doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity at some point for that to fit if they understand where you're coming from. And so I think there's a weakness on both sides. There's a weakness of, okay, I've got a hammer and everything's a nail. And on the family office side is, you don't really understand, and I don't have time to explain it to you, but the nuance is this, right? That it might be a responsibility of both sides, right?
Yeah, the challenge is definitely one of time. Is the family office community, as family offices, we have a luxury that no other investors in the world have, and that is time.
Yeah.
We truly are the truest form of long-term investor. We don't have an urgency. We can go, and in fact, I talked to a lot of peers now in this environment that one told me the other day they've gone 2 years without doing a new deal. They've just been supporting their existing companies. We don't have to put capital to work. We don't have the pressure to put capital to work, unlike funds who are managing third-party capital. Funds,
sovereign wealth funds, endowments, they're all compelled to deploy capital within a mandate and time frame. And families can wait forever, right?
Exactly. And so getting to know families, if you're a service provider, you're not always given the opportunity to be in the same room and and they find when they get in that room, like, oh, we're in that room today, so let's make the most of it. It's a constant repeat thing. Over the years, you get to know people and you get to spend time with them and you build relationships, and that's what we're all about. I like to, I guess I'd leave with this, which is I get asked, well, so what is that purpose of that network? And the answer is because I feel that I could pick up the phone and solve any challenge. I don't want to say problem, any challenge I face with 3 phone calls.
Yeah.
And those 3 phone calls can be to another family office. It could be to a service provider or to a private banker or to some other trusted resource. But I know who to call to solve what problem, or who to call that's going to then direct me to the next person to help me solve that.
Yep.
And that's the game.
Totally. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that the participants in this family office world, so to speak, view it as a business, view it as a community, view it as, something other than sort of, because let's face it, there's not that many family offices, but they represent a lot of wealth. And, we have to think about this as a business. And I think you make a very good point in that regard. It's not just fitting something that we used to do into family offices. It's more of a business.
And back to the point I'm making earlier, we are a sophisticated base of investors.
No doubt.
So terminology has changed, and the nature and the perspective and the perception of family offices has changed. And I think that this industry is just going to continue to grow and get stronger, and and everyone's going to continue to try to serve, and some will figure it out and some won't. But I think the key is patience, and persistence, and persistence through patience, not persist. I get messages sometimes from people where they'll send me the 5th email of the week saying, "Why haven't you responded to us?" That's not the right approach.
Yeah,
But it's a people business as much as any other. In fact, arguably more so.
I would say more so. And just like in life, it's a business that requires a series of adjustments. And if you're paying attention, you can make them. So, hey, Ari, I really appreciate you doing this, and value your friendship and your as a business colleague. And so really thank you for doing this. I think.
No, it's my pleasure. And by the next time you and I connect, I will have checked my notes and figured out where we first met.
Yeah, it was so long ago, right? Really, really nicely done. And thank you. Thank you, everybody, for participating here and sharing with us the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. So thank you, all Family Office Insights members, and anybody else who happens to see this and benefit from it, and Ari's insights. Thank you so much.